If you ever find yourself as a test subject at Aperture Science, you'll probably find yourself in Chamber 18. I want you to look at how many elements there are in this chamber. There's turrets, lasers, a light bridge, the portals, and the portal gun itself. Now these elements might make sense to you, but what if I showed these elements to these guys? These are non-gaming grandparents, and if you put them in this chamber, they would have no idea how to progress. But you see, Valve thinks about the grandparents. And every single chamber, room, and hallway in this game is actually an invisible tutorial that teaches everyone from pro gamers all the way to grandpa about how to succeed in this game. And why really, when you think about it, good puzzle design really is just one long tutorial. And I want to see if Valve actually does something special with their tutorials that other games just don't do. Welcome to the Aperture Science Testing Training Program. In this informative training series, we'll cover how you can be a better observer and what to look for as our test subjects bravely better science. Make sure you pay attention to this next segment as it contains legal information for... I am literally spitting right now because my mouth is so wet and dry. Please ensure that all test subjects awake in chamber. This chamber is designed so when the operator opens a portal, test subjects can see themselves through the portal. This room is specifically designed by our engineers so that they can see the room they started in through the glass as they walk around it. This next room is also designed around teaching new test subjects the core of science progress. Please ensure that the 1500 megawatt Aperture Science heavy duty super colliding super button is functioning prior to test subjects entering this chamber. Also ensure that the weighted storage cube still functions under normal Earth gravity conditions prior to starting the test. And under any circumstances, do not call the weighted storage cube a box. After the player runs through putting boxes on buttons, they should have at least a basic grasp on how basic puzzles in this game are solved. And just like in the first game, Chambers 1, 2, and 3 run players through the basic foundational mechanics that they need to know in order to beat this game. Chamber 2 introduces these stand-up buttons, which allows players to choose where to place the portal. This is different from how the chamber was in Portal 1 because Valve wanted players who already solved this puzzle in that game to have more agency in solving it here. Making players actually hit the button ensures that they're also better prepared for placing portals later on in the game. Introducing new elements like this is great and all, but why does this really matter? I think that Valve's tutorials are really their secret sauce. And I think the best way to tell you about that is to show you the very first segment of the game. Now the thing is, this is actually one of the least invisible tutorials featured in this game. The game directly prompts you to move around, look at artwork, and to jump, all with pop-ups directly telling players which button to press. But I think this is still a great tutorial because this whole segment feels like an experience. And for all the things it directly tells you, I think it implies a lot more about the state of the world that Portal is in. Juxtaposing the clean motel room with the dirty one immediately signals that something went wrong and that time has passed. And as the room is being ripped apart when Wheatley is transporting players, players can see chambers stacked on top of each other, which kind of makes you wonder, how big is Aperture Science? Intrigue in narrative sections like this can make a boring tutorial feel interesting because you actively want to keep pressing on to find out what happens. And because of the direct tutorial not feeling boring, even gamers that aren't particularly skilled at video games can progress and play. Now, generally through most of Portal 2, Valve tries to show players how the mechanics work rather than tell them. So let's see how Valve teaches players how the laser works. The thermal discouragement beam is one of Aperture Science's latest science experiments. It is yet to be installed in most test chambers, but when we start rolling them out, you should always make sure to install it within view of the test subject. As test subjects may be elderly or senile, they need to see it being lowered and understand that they are highly discouraged from any form of flesh interaction with the thermal discouragement beam. If a test subject does have a flesh interaction with the laser, please keep in mind that all test chambers should be completable with at least one remaining limb. And if necessary, all chamber panels can be flipped up for easy disposal if the test subject expires from blood loss. Lasers as a mechanic kind of act as a parallel to the box and the button. They're unique because they require spatial awareness of the beam at all times, and can also act as an obstacle for players to overcome. They're first introduced by having players see the laser receptacle shining a faint light on the ceiling, encouraging players to place a portal on the ceiling. And another thing I really like about this chamber is how the laser raises the elevator rather than lowering it. Because players need to be standing on the elevator when the receptacle is active, this visually teaches the player how this mechanic works. In the next chamber, the laser's mechanics are reaffirmed by having players shine yet another laser into the receptacle. Except this time when they first enter the chamber, it's shining on a black wall, which reaffirms that portals can't go on this surface. This layering of information means that players are constantly being reminded of how a previous mechanic works while learning how new mechanics work. This ensures that players don't just forget old mechanics and are prepared for every single test that this game throws at them. In the next chamber, players are then tested on lasers. Again, shocking, but this time they need to guide two lasers into the receptacles. I think this chamber is really important because both lasers are horizontal, but one of the receptacles is horizontal and the other one is vertical. This teaches players that sometimes you need to redirect a horizontal laser and make it vertical. This concept of switching a mechanic's direction becomes important for other elements, like the light bridge. As the game progresses, elements become a lot more multi-use. This light bridge allows players to walk across gaps, but it can also be used to block turrets and items. Teaching that to players means that each mechanic's concept needs to be taught individually. Even though really you can look at the light bridge and go, that's one mechanic, it really has a lot of functions, and all of those functions need to be taught individually. Although by this point in the game, Valve was a lot more confident in players' abilities. In Chamber 11, the light bridge can be clearly seen when entering the chamber, and shows players how it can travel through a portal, how they can walk through a portal on it, and the importance of redirecting the tunnel even when players are standing on it. Then, in the next chamber, they need to do all of this again, just so that they can really understand how this mechanic works. Later on, players need to use the light bridge as a shield rather than a platform. This change in function is communicated to players by having the turrets be immediately covered by one when they enter the chamber. Sometimes it's the simple tweaks like this that can make a mechanic more easily understood. The Emancipation Grill is unique is that it's first introduced after they solve the first chamber, rather than part of the puzzle itself, and it isn't used as a puzzle element until this chamber. According to a Valve designer, this chamber originally had an open space above these fizzlers, implying that players need to look up and shoot a portal to get across. Then that open space was redesigned to have a circular cutout, but that still was a little confusing, so eventually they simplified the puzzle room and moved the circular cutout to here, and this change made it a lot more understandable to playtesters. And this got me thinking, level design really is a form of language. When it's done well, I think level design can tell a story more efficiently than words can. And in Portal 2, it's multi-layered, showing how the facility looks after years of abandonment, and it also acts as a guide, pointing players where to look without taking control away from them. For example, this light flickering off in the distance is meant to grab players' attention and get players in the mindset of navigating these behind-the-scenes areas. And because later on, this skill of seeing a faraway surface and being able to portal to it is a concept that they need to understand. Now, before we continue on, I think there's a flaw in this approach. I'm sure you've inevitably found yourself stuck in Portal 1 or 2 at some point or another. And some players probably haven't finished the game because they just got stuck. And that's the flaw with this style of game design. Some players will get left behind. But because the game is designed well, I think it acts as a barrier. In a lot of ways, aren't the gameplay portions of video games about overcoming barriers? In fact, isn't everything in our lives about overcoming some kind of barrier or obstacle? For years, humans were hunter-gatherers, and our survival literally depended on overcoming the barrier of having food. And that desire to overcome something is evolutionarily hardwired into us. So when something is handed to us or something is too easy, we end up feeling unfulfilled and unsatisfied. Anyway, let's keep the tutorial momentum going and talk about portal momentum. Similar to how redirecting lasers affects how players can perceive redirecting light bridges, I think portal momentum is essential to understand future mechanics. And Portal 2 does a great job of communicating mechanics through consistent level design. This concept is initially taught to players by having them portal here, which naturally causes them to fall from the orange portal. Then players see this diving board design and the image of someone jumping off. Then that design switches to just having white panels at the bottom of like a cliff. And later on in the behind the scenes areas, the catwalk's guardrails are missing where players need to jump. And I think this consistent design language makes it so that players can do more complex maneuvers like the double or the triple fling later on in the game as well. Portal 2 requires a lot more layering of mechanics than Portal 1 did. And being able to figure out what you're being tested on, even outside of a traditional test chamber, only works if players can routinely demonstrate that they understand the mechanic. And because solving puzzles means understanding how different mechanics interact with each other, like how faith plates affects the fling. The Aperture Science aerial faith plate should be introduced by having test subjects launched over a gap, preferably bottomless or filled with water. If filled with water, subjects will drown. However, the Aperture Science handheld portal device is waterproof, so it can be safely retrieved after the subject's expiration. If the test subject is an Aperture Science employee, please see HR for body collection and funeral arrangements. I think sometimes the design of an element itself can be part of the tutorial. This slim shape of the faith plate makes it clear which directions you'll be flung, although the arrows do help with that as well. It might seem overkill to add obvious details to a game like this, but when players are having to deal with controlling their character, interacting with the environment, listening to the story, and solving puzzles, I think sometimes they'll just miss subtle details. Another good example of consistent level design is how the faith plate always uses this target icon to signify where players will land. And this chamber teaches that to players by having the target literally rise up before players land. The next chamber also reaffirms how they work by having players jump on faith plates again and again and again and again. Both of these chambers also do a really good job of preparing players for grabbing objects out of midair. Obviously in Chamber 5, players just need to time their jump properly to grab the box. But in Chamber 6, the player must catch a box that's being flung from the other side of the room. The chamber sends down a line of trash so they can get an idea on how to position themselves before getting the real box. And I love that detail because when I first played the game, the trash never felt like a tutorial, it felt like a natural part of the game. Now before we move on, I need you to look at something. Also, you need to see this. And while you're here, why don't you subscribe? It's really important that these mechanics are introduced in a proper order. Turrets are dangerous, but by the time they reach them, they'll have experience dealing with pits and lasers. So having something specifically hostile to them won't be as overwhelming to players as if these turrets were introduced earlier on in the game. However, even with turrets, players are eased into interacting with them so that they should fully understand how they work before they enter the line of fire. Our state-of-the-art sentry turrets are designed as an all-purpose home defense solution, now with 33% more bullets. For testing purposes, ensure all test subjects are funneled to chamber numbers to ensure test subjects are not immediately eviscerated by the turret. Please keep in mind that a test subject's fragile bodies are ravaged by bullets. Encourage them to lay down and apply pressure to all affected areas. Monitoring how long it takes to bleed out should also be considered part of the test. This entire test chamber is designed around teaching players the different ways to dispose of turrets. The chamber walks them through knocking over turrets, placing a portal underneath one, and dropping boxes on them to knock it over. Then when players reach these final turrets, they're able to dispose of them in a way that feels natural to them. Giving players options like this makes it so that players are an active participant in puzzle solving rather than just going through the motions looking for the intended solution. It's important that players feel like they have agency solving puzzles because when they go into these behind the scenes areas, the game takes off the guardrails and requires players to think on their feet a lot more. However, even though they're required to think on their feet a lot more, the game still properly prepares them for how to progress. For example, the junk turrets are needed in the behind the scenes puzzle, but they're first introduced safely in this glass room, where players can see how the regular turrets and the junk turrets function. And like I said earlier, how puzzles layer mechanics, players are taught how to catch boxes in Chamber 6, which is then tested by having them catch a junk turret here. I think gels are some of the most complex mechanic in the game because it's really one mechanic with a ton of different uses. And similar to light bridges and the Fling, each aspect of the mechanic is taught to players individually. Before each gel is introduced, players go through a segment where they turn a valve to activate the gel. When players first interact with the blue gel, they need to jump across a low pit, then use that same gel to jump across a high pit, just so that players can understand how their height is kept when bouncing on the gel. Then, in the next chamber, players are taught different ways to cross gaps with the blue gel. And then in the next chamber, players are taught how the blue gel interacts with objects. Like here, you literally cannot grab the box until it breaks the glass. And I love that because it forces players to see how the object is affected by it. And this knowledge is important for defeating turrets later on in the game. And this is why so many chambers in this game are designed around teaching player a new mechanic while testing them on old ones. The water gel is introduced in a similar way. This room makes it very easy to send the blue gel into the dripping water and see how it functions. The orange gel's function is demonstrated through this ramp design, which it's just kind of something natural in video games where if you see a ramp, you just want to drive or run across it. Players need to do this several times over the course of the test chamber just so that they have a good grasp of how the mechanic works. And finally, players are taught how orange gel affects momentum through portals as they need to fling up to hit this button to open the door. Then in the next chamber, players need to combine both the blue gel and the orange gel to cross this gap. I really like when players cross this gap, players naturally hit this white panel. It's just another way Valve uses level design as hints to progress, as players need to place a portal on the other side and then one on this white panel to fling across to the elevator. Another way that Valve uses consistent communication is having this yellow and black icon, which communicates that players need gel to come from this spot in the puzzle. I really love the way white gel is introduced because it's introduced in the area where players are activating the gel. You can see it spill out of its tube, and since white has been consistently associated with the portal surface, players can naturally conclude that this too functions as a portal surface. And then this puzzle tests players on their knowledge of how the blue gel works and how the orange gel works. The main functionality of the Excursion funnel is to cross gaps and to transport items. Valve introduces the funnel to the player by having them first ride it up to the second level, then use it to cross the gap to get to the Franken box. After the box is retrieved, players need to funnel it up to a button on the ceiling. Then the next chamber reaffirms this lesson by having players funnel through the portal and redirect themselves mid-funnel, kind of similar to what they had to do with the light bridge earlier on in the game. Then they also need to transport a Franken box across the gap as well. By the way, did you know that contrary to popular belief, it's actually Frankenbox's monster? In this chamber, players are reintroduced to the Fling panel and need to use it to fly into the Excursion funnel to cross the gap. Portal 2 seems to have taken a lot of the game design from the first game and refined it. Like for example, in the final chapter of Portal 2, the player needs to place a portal to redirect bombs to this white gel container. This reminds me of a similar segment in Portal 1 where players need to redirect rockets to this tube to ride through it. But in the first game, a lot of players ended up solving this puzzle a completely different way, which again is perfectly fine, but it just feels a little less satisfying than blowing something up, I think. In Portal 2, players clearly see how bombs work before blowing the tube up. And of course, these bombs come into play in the final boss, where they need to redirect bombs onto Wheatley. I think it goes without saying, but Portal 2 is the most fun puzzle game ever made. And I think when discussing game design, it's really easy to just discuss how fun a game is. But I think games like Portal are classics because of the underlying thought that went into the mechanics and how those mechanics are communicated to players. Portal 1 and 2 sets players up for success and makes the process of learning fun.
In fact, it's so fun that it never feels like you're learning anything at all. It just feels like you're naturally playing the game. And that to me is what good game design really is.
Video complete.